right, if you see on the blue and the red, you know it's time for Checkpoint, and tonight we're having a discussion still on the Security Laws Amendment Act that was just passed in Parliament last Thursday. Are the amendments that were made to the original act that was put before the House sometimes earlier in December, were they really far-reaching in changing the things that needed to be changed, or do we still have a law that Kenyans, by and large, by quite a number of them, would not be satisfied with? That's what we're discussing today. And right next to me is the Member of Parliament for Kiharu, a man who was on the floor of the National Assembly during the throwing of papers and the passing of the bill. Mr. Irungu Kangata, thanks very much for joining us. Right in the center is a man who is no stranger to controversy, at least in the work that he does, activist Boniface Mwangi. Thanks once again for joining us on Checkpoint. And not a stranger to Checkpoint either, Washington Makodingo, political consultant, here to discuss the if, buts, and the maybes, as well as perhaps his own perspective on what these laws portend for Kenya. And let's start with what's on our Super Bowl right now. There were quite a number of rafts of laws that had problems with them, and this one was specific to an industry that, you know, gives you the benefit of what we're doing right now, talking. And it was in the Prevention of Terror Act. The ones in green are what have been added in the recent amendments. A person who publishes, broadcasts, or causes to be published or distributed through print, digital, or electronic means insulting, threatening, or inciting material or images of dead and injured persons which are likely to cause fear and alarm to the general public, upon conviction is liable, commits an offense, and upon conviction is liable to have a fine of 5 million shillings or imprisonment of a term not exceeding 3 years, or both. Let's start with that, because that, to quite a number of people, confronts the one tenet that a lot of people fought for, which is freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Let's start with you, Irungu. What do you think of that amendment? Do you think that it addresses what needs to be addressed in the fight against terror?
Yes, indeed. Personally, I don't see there is any problem with that provision because, well, some of the words which appear to be subjective in that provision, their parameters, their meanings is going to be set by what we call precedent in the court of law. So meaning we should not really be worried about the words which are appearing to be subjective. It is the courts which are going to set the boundaries, the parameters. But what if the precedent that is set is so extreme that that is what is followed from then onwards? Well, the presumption is that we have liberal courts. Of course, the courts are enjoined to interpret statutes or even the constitution in a liberal manner. So in our understanding is that the courts are going to be guided by the liberal spirit, which is contained in the constitution. All right, there's another part of this same act, if we can just get it on screen, that talks about what we can and can't publish as members of the public. If we can just get it on screen now for the benefit of everybody. Person who publishes or broadcasts any information which undermines investigations or security operations by the National Police Service, and included now all the Kenya Defence Forces, commits an offence and is liable upon conviction to a fine not exceeding 5 million shillings or an imprisonment of a term not exceeding 3 years, or both. Boniface, do you think that we need permission to be able to publish things about national security?
No, we don't need permission. I think what's going to happen, you have to stop doing investigative journalism. On the first other law, you have to stop taking pictures of when there's a terror attack, you can't even take pictures. And what he talks about liberal courts, I want to go back, slightly back a bit, and talk about 8 young men who were arrested last week. They went to a liberal court where a robbery with violence suspect was released on a 10,000 shillings bond, and these protesters were released on a 300,000 bond. That means that when you have those open-ended laws, they're subject to interpretation. And who decides what is offensive, what is disturbing? Are you going to have a committee of people sit down and say that's disturbing? I think these laws are actually going infringing on freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Our government is fighting for legitimacy, and our government suffers from self-esteem issues. So these are self-esteem laws to feel legitimate.
All right, very interesting. Makodingo, let's bring you into this. We all remember what happened with Westgate last year, and there were examples of what the media should and shouldn't have done. But the overall effect of the coverage of Westgate was that without the media, there were very many things about Westgate that would not have come to light. Do you think that with a law like this in future, if something like Westgate were to occur, unfortunately, in this country again, that could be the case?
Thank you. Let's look at the intent of these sections. The first one was meant, the way terrorism works is that they need publicity. Yeah, they killed 20 people. They need it splashed to newspapers, circulating on social media, because that is how they terrorize you. Yeah, you see that happening, and you walk out of malls, you stay at home, you don't go to public places, and they use it to also recruit others. You know, recruit others, get more money for their causes, because they're saying they're effective. You stop that from happening, they won't have incentive. I mean, if you kill people, 100 people somewhere, and nobody knows about it, there is no incentive to continue doing what you're doing. So the intent was, one, to discourage terrorists, but also to give Kenyans an opportunity to deal with some of these things. Now, I know they're saying that we need needed permission from the National Police Service, and even the victims. This only happens in Kenya, that you find someone has just escaped a terrorism attack, and 5 minutes later they are being interviewed. Yeah, on live TV, the coverage is beamed to everybody else. They haven't even been cancelled. They don't even know what they're talking about. Yeah. For me, I think we have to draw a line. The media has to draw a line. I think it's unfortunate that we had to legislate so that this cannot be done. I thought that is what self-regulation should have done.
All right.
Now, secondly, on investigations.
Yeah.
You do not want to go telling terrorists that the police are tracking their phones, for example, or someone got into the country with explosives. They are sitting somewhere in a hotel in Mombasa. Police are investigating, the investigations are not complete, and you're already going out there telling people that the police are investigating a house in Mombasa that they suspect has explosives. Do you expect them to go there tomorrow and actually find those explosives?
Okay, that presumes that the police would be doing their job in the right manner. And the question that I posed to you was specific to something that has become endemic with the police, which is corruption leading to ineffectiveness in the execution of its mandate. If the police are ineffective in countering terrorism, shouldn't we know about it?
I think it's not. I think our security architecture is overwhelmed. Yeah, with the terrorism. I don't think we have done enough in terms of detection of crime, and I think part of the amendments that are brought onto this bill were to give the police and NIS the capacity to actually just do that, so that we are prepared for these people before the attacks take place.
We'll get to that in a moment. Bonnie, I just want you to respond, but there's also a corollary to that argument. We saw the siege in Sydney and how it was covered. Glowing tributes to the media for the restraint, the media there for the restraint with which they showed in covering that siege, which turned out to be one associated with terrorism. Do you think on that strength alone these bills should be able to stand?
I don't think so. So let me say this. We are willing to lose some freedoms for the sake of security. That's given. You want to do that. But when you come and say that we are going to censor you what you can be able to air or broadcast, that goes to another extent that the government knows that it has failed to protect its own citizens. And number two, there's not a single of these laws could have prevented Westgate, Mpeketoni, or Baragoi, or any of the terror attacks. Because even if you had these laws and even address corruption, this will always happen. You said something that we actually need to go back to. Corruption. Corruption is the biggest problem in this country. And without addressing corruption, even in legislation, selfies, websites, speeches, threats will stop it.
Irungu, corruption. I mean, that really is the big elephant in the room, especially with regard to these laws. I think there's maybe one or two areas that addresses corruption at length in these laws, and yet everybody, including the president, agrees that that is the one problem with our security agencies. Do you think that these laws are going to go in any way to addressing corruption?
Well, to me, the issue of corruption and the issue of these laws are two different issues. Because, for instance, you cannot say we are not going to provide a law to capture thieves because police are always going to become corrupt. You cannot say, for instance, we should ban or even do away with traffic police because they are always doing corrupt things. So therefore, let us put a line between the issues of corruption and the issue of this.
Can I ask him a question?
In my own opinion.
Can I ask him?
In my own opinion, these laws, in terms of implementation, if they are indeed implemented to the letter, they are very good laws. As to whether the police are going to become corrupt or not, well, to me that's another issue which we can address, and I concede we need to do more to ensure that our police are not as corrupt.
Bonnie wanted to jump in and ask him a
question. How
will
the laws prevent terror attacks?
Well, number one, it is very clear the old laws which were there, which we were repealing, they tended to disperse power. So that, for instance, the person in charge of our security system is that person does not have powers to transfer this officer. That person, for instance, in terms of disciplining an officer, is fettered. But now, when it's come to the issue of security, you need to concentrate power upon one entity. So that one entity can be able to give orders which can be respected, and that person, when there are security lapses, then you can be able to put that person into account. So, sorry,
wasn't this the entire point of putting those structures in place, to run away from the concentration of power around one person? Isn't that the whole point, especially in terms of this constitution? You can answer, and then we'll get Makodingo to talk about the same.
The point is, it is impossible, practically impossible, in a country that is facing terrorism issues or constantly having security problems, to disperse power. Because the issue of dispersal of power, in my own opinion, came about out of the Kanu misrule. And I agree it was wrong. You see, you would imagine during the Kanu rule, that power was concentrated in one entity, so therefore that entity tended to abuse power. Now, the reason why we think probably we need to take some of the good practices which were there then is because of this new emerging issue of terror.
Of terrorism.
If at all there was no terror, I can tell you we had no reason to do the amendments.
Okay.
But now with the terrorism, we need now to look at the structure of our security
agencies. Makodingo, do you think that it is necessary to concentrate power around one individual, be it the Inspector General or the President himself, in dealing with terrorism-related issues and insecurity generally, and to put it in the law?
Security is not... First of all, we have said that the buck stops with the president on insecurity or, otherwise.
Yes.
But the law we made, the constitution we made, was extremely ambitious. On security, it was pure activism. Yeah? I mean, the notion that the president will be responsible for security, but not actually be able to even give orders to the Inspector General, for example, to do something, that in fact he could have an Inspector General, he literally can't fire. Yeah? The IG could only give orders to 2 people.
But weren't there provisions within the NPS Act on how the president could get rid of the Inspector General?
The Constitution says if he's incompetent, gross misconduct and everything.
Yes.
Then the Act...
Wouldn't you then characterize what happened over the past year with regard to our security agencies, either incompetence or one of those problems that
actually it was all the reasons
all
the Constitution lists, all of them actually.
So the president had a mandate to act.
Yes, but the problem is the Act made it extremely difficult for him to actually act, because the Act required a lengthy process of a tribunal going to Parliament. The president should be able to fire the Inspector General if he's not working. Now the Act, even the law makes it even worse, by the way. Yeah? The IG technically could not find a police officer on the road and fire them and give them an order, because he had to act through his deputy inspectors. So essentially, Kimayo could only give orders to 2 people. But I think Kimayo himself, and the way they structured, the way we've taken time to structure the leadership of the police, was in itself a mess.
Could that have been done without changing the law at least in coordination with, for instance, the Police Service Commission, to be able to put in place a structure that is effective? Structures don't necessarily have to depend on changes of law, do they?
Yeah, but you see, the problem with the disciplined services and the police specifically is this notion that we have 2 services, the administration police and the regular services, and the 2 services are not answerable to each other. I have gone to counties, in a recent study, I have gone to counties where the AP and the regular police do not see eye to eye.
Yes.
You go to a county, you have 2 county commanders. There's a county commander for AP, county commander for police. Yeah, they were appointed in a rush. So in fact, you find in certain instances, in a lot of them actually, the county police commander and the OCPD are of the same rank. In fact, in certain instances, there is a county I went to where the OCPDs, all the OCPDs under the county commander, are older, more experienced than the county commander. So we had problems that we needed to sort out through the Act. Yeah? And I think the Act has. Now, you asked if this Act would have stopped Westgate and probably Mpeketoni. I'm not so sure about
all of these other attacks. Yeah.
I think it could. If the information we have is correct, I think it could. Because you remember NIS complaining that they had given pretty good
Information.
good information that was not acted on.
Yes.
What the act has done is that now it enables NIS to not just give information, but if they see a terrorist or they suspect someone is a terrorist, they can arrest and then take them to a police station, so that the police will no longer say that we got information that was not actionable. Yeah, and I think those are part of the problems we needed to address, and we need to address them urgently. This is not something that could have waited, because terrorists are not sitting somewhere in Somalia waiting for ourselves to sort the mess that we have in security for them to attack us.
Speaking of the NIS, let's just go to the next slides and look at that law. In fact, that's another law that was quite seriously contested. And these are the key amendments. We're not going to read the entire law. And NIS officers cannot arrest and detain, but arrest and hand over to the nearest police station. Covert operations now changed to special operations. And NIS in special operations must obtain warrants for searches and for getting information, moving, recording, that sort of thing. But that still is in conjunction with the acts of one person, the Director General of the NIS, in terms of giving those kinds of orders, right? Have we still addressed the human rights gap that existed with the original act, where the NIS Director General would, upon his orders, give these sweeping powers to individuals to be able to do pretty much anything that they wanted?
Well, firstly, let me say this amendment is a very good one. In terms of now the issue of these entities saying that they gave information, that information was not acted upon, has now gone away. That's number one. Number two, I think the checks and balances contained in this provision, they are sufficient, in the sense that, as you can see at number 3, of course they have to do that in conjunction with a warrant given by a court. Number 3, we must also not look at this law in isolation to other entities which exist to check on the abyss of state power. For instance, we have the office of the Ombudsman. We also have the Kenya National Human Rights Commission. Meaning, if you feel the police or even the state is abusing its powers, you have the recourse to go to those entities.
But specific to NIS officers, a lot of them act covertly, and the NIS Act specifically protects a lot of the covert actions that they take that they do. Where would the accountability fall then, if we're talking about accountability coming from the Ombudsman and from other state actors, if you don't even know what these people are doing?
No, you can't say that. Number one, you can see we have changed that now. It's no longer covert operation. It is now being deemed as special. Meaning,
intelligence officers around the world act in a covert manner. That's how a lot of them are able to get information.
For instance, we were engaging in some language games. No, there was very clear purpose as to why we changed from covert
to special. What was that reason? Just
no, the rationale is very simple. It's no longer secretive per se. It is something now that is, you can now ask the officer to account. You can demand, for instance, for a search warrant. You understand? But you see, when you talk about covert, it means there will be little interaction between the officer and the person to be arrested. But now when you talk of a special, it means, one, you can demand a warrant from the officer. But number two, that person is going to take you to the police station. He is going to do a recording at the OB. Previously, under the old laws, they could not do that. They could arrest you without even recording at the OB.
Let me say this. NIS is already covered on that, because right now, if you actually go to the police, or in case they arrest you, and you go to the media, if it's under national security, the media can't document that. They can't talk about it. So you go back to the days of special branch, where they used to pick you up and lock you up, and now they can hold you for more than 24 hours. They can hold you for 90 days.
No.
I think
it is not.
That is not true. I think part of the problem with the debate on this bill has been lack of information, in my opinion. I think especially post amendments, because a lot of amendments were done to actually protect human rights and to protect us from the excesses. Now, NIS gets a budget of nearly 18 billion shillings. A lot of us, a lot of the people we know, sit in bars and just drink. We want accountability. But as it is now, originally close, I think it was close 62, the one that was saying they could do anything. They could arrest you for anything, and detain you. And there wasn't anything saying what they will do with you. I mean, that was reminiscent of Nyayo era days. Now, it says, and it's very specific, by the way, just specific to terrorism, yeah, and other heinous crimes, so to speak. And when they have information that you are a threat to national security, they will arrest you and they will hand you over to the police. Now, the police have to produce you in court within 24 hours. If there is a need for them to detain you longer, they'll have to ask the court, apply to the court to grant an order, a 10, 20 day, up to 365 days of detention. But that determination is not made by the police. The determination is made by the court, to detain you. Which is why, and I think that is where the checks are coming in. We involve the judiciary so that someone else,
would be able to check.
Should be able to check that the police have sufficient evidence. And in fact, it actually says that they need to show you, and you can contest it. Yeah, you can contest the order for detention. With your lawyer, they'll give you the information that they have, as long as that information is not
sensitive, and that I think is done in evidence rules as well. But let me just compare something that's being compared, especially by people from within Jubilee, especially after the statement from the U.S. State Department came out criticizing parts of these laws, that the Patriot Act is far worse than this. And in many respects it just might be so, but especially with respect to monitoring of communication, they are very specific on what kind of communication can be monitored, in what circumstances, what judges would be able to give the kinds of orders that you would require to monitor that information. Right now, monitoring information there means anything really. And doesn't that also rub some of the rights that we should have in terms of our rights to privacy the wrong way?
To me, in my own opinion, I think we should again resort to the courts to interpret that provision.
Yes.
Because we have what we call precedent, and in my own opinion, I don't foresee a reasonable court interpreting that provision to mean that the officers or even the state can look at any of your communication. To me, I believe, in my own opinion, we shall have boundaries. I'm sure there are areas that the state cannot go. That's number one. Number two, when you compare American law and again this Kenyan law, there's no doubt about it. This one is more liberal. This one has more checks and balances as opposed to the American system. Let me give you a good example. In America, for instance, they can detain you without trial. For instance, we have the Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. In Kenya, I don't foresee any kind of treatment that can be made against any citizen, whether foreigner or even Kenyan.
But
so
even
we have
within
a better
those Patriot laws, there were certain laws that had a shelf life, about 5 years, that would give mandates to specific agencies to do certain things, but that would fall, would become useless after a certain period of time. These laws are being put in posterity. I mean, there are certain places that we can compare and contrast, but isn't there still room to be able to tighten these laws a little bit?
Well, fine. Of course, after 10 or even 5, if Kenyans feel that indeed we need to do away with some of these laws, they'll pressurize us. We shall amend. In any event, these laws are yet to take effect. So probably we need to give them some time. If at all we think that we need to revise some of those laws, we shall ultimately do that.
All right. Let's come to the human element in terms of implementation of the law. We all touched on it a little earlier. And you said that corruption within the police and these laws should not be construed to be one and the same. Yet there are always overlaps, especially in the more recent terror attacks that we've seen. There has been a very serious element of corruption. What, though, is being done legislatively to address that problem?
One, personally, I remember I took a proposal to amend the relevant anti-corruption law to enhance the penalty for grave corruption. For some reasons, it was rejected. I intend to revisit that issue again probably after the 6 months, as provided by the standing orders. That's number one. Number two, of course, you media, you have a role towards probably telling Kenyans, those police officers or even any government official who is doing corruption. Number three, we have seen the president, we have seen the deputy president being very strong when it comes to the issue of inefficiency and the issue of corruption.
Yeah, being very strong to the extent of complaining about it, but where's the action? I mean, 2 years down the line, we remember the president complained about corruption in his own office. And yet, to this day, we really don't know what happened with that. We've heard about corruption with respect to terrorism and insecurity. Bonnie, I'll just come to you in a moment, and you raise this point before I go to Makodingo. what needs to happen within our security agencies to be able to once and for all, or at least by and large, get rid of the problem of corruption?
I think you need to address the poor pay. That's one of the biggest issues. They're poorly paid, they're poorly housed, they're poorly equipped, they're poorly trained, they're not motivated, and they have to rely on bribes for them to actually sustain their lives. And there's a lot of loopholes for them to get money, because you know very well that if you go to court, it's a very long, protracted process. So you actually pay bribes to actually make it easy. I think the government should make it easy for me to pay my penalty if I break the law. That's what needs to happen. The second thing, that the president needs to stop fighting corruption with rhetoric and speeches. There needs to be action. This is second day in office. We haven't had a single conviction on corruption. No one has been jailed. So all he has done is that website that he did and the speeches. And I don't think even these new laws are going to make someone not take a bribe. So if you actually, then police reforms. I hope the next Inspector General is going to come. We'll have legitimacy to actually lead the police force, because at the moment there's been a lot of issues that the junior officers want a civilian police force, because they think a civilian did not come up through the ranks, is not corrupt,
therefore doesn't have the authority to lead them, and
there's no actually baggage. So if you can actually get a civilian police chief, that would actually be very helpful, because this person comes from the civilian side and comes and actually reforms. Because if you look at the way officers live, look at the Liboi border, they live like chicken. They live very badly.
Would a civilian police inspector general resolve that, Boni?
Because I think there's no connection to the corruption networks of the police force. If you look at the IPOA report on the Baragoi killings and Lam, we can see the entrenched corruption in the police force. So I don't think there's anyone who is fit to serve.
Interestingly that you mentioned Baragoi, the person who, I forget his name now, very infamous guy.
The one in prison.
Who was he's a civilian.
And he was an assistant police general. What is the name of this guy?
He was Waiganjo. He was given the role of a reservist, and yet he wasn't really a reservist. So anyway, the argument about civilians.
No, if you get a qualified civilian to reform the force. That's all you need to do. A civilian who actually, because there's actually standing orders. There are actually orders that you can actually follow. You don't actually have to be a police officer to lead a police
follow
service.
Those orders. Makodingo, I can see you itching to jump in.
I think this is part of our problem. That we imagine that we'll get some corporate honcho to come to the police and reform it. The corporate world is the most corrupt. It's more corrupt than government is. In fact, if the corporate world wasn't corrupt, there will be no corruption in government, because they're the ones paying the bribes. We need to appreciate that the police service as it is now have some extremely competent and very good officers. I've traveled in counties, I've dealt with security people, so I know. I can name off my hand, or one hand, OCPDs I have met that are extremely good. We need to find someone within the service, that understands the police work, that understands the problems that the officers have, and make them Inspector General. This notion that we keep going to the military to pick someone, or every time we have a problem, we imagine that when you bring someone from outside, what are you telling the rest of those people that are in there? But secondly,
there's an argument about decentralization of policing in this country and taking it down to county level, so that the police officers that police you are more accountable to you. Do you think that could work in terms of resolving corruption?
But as it is, police services are decentralized. The police are on the ground. They are out there. I think we need to address actual problems. I've had counties, governors saying, give us responsibility over security. Half of this country, is either conflict prone, or outrightly have conflict. A lot of these counties do. A lot of these governors were people who were elected on the basis of an ethnic or a clan alliance. Can you imagine, for example, if, let's just say, in Mandera, for example, that the governor was responsible for security during the Moyale fight? What would have happened? We need to remove security from politics. And I think this is the part that we seem to forget. Politicians cannot handle security.
So the president is a politician, and they're appointing the IG.
But I think there is something else about police that we need to seriously think about. How do we get police officers? I mean, who gets there? For a long time, I think for like forever, the police is where you go when you have nothing else. When you have failed, you cannot even go to a college or anything.
There are no other options.
You go to the police. Why is it we can't get graduates and pay police officers like we pay doctors?
I'll leave you to make those in your final comments. Now we have to go into that. Wanakangata, I want you to comment about precedent that you had talked about in the courts. Should it happen in 2015, because that's when the laws probably will be operationalized most. Should it happen that the precedent in court would be that human rights abuses would be enforced by those rulings, and that really the worst case scenario would happen, would you be the first to stand and ask for a repeal of these laws?
Yes, of course. First and foremost, I would imagine the interaction between those laws and the citizen is going to start happening in 2015.
Yeah.
So therefore, I would imagine those citizens who interact with that law, they will go to the court, and therefore I foresee judgments and rulings coming up in 2015. From those judgments and rulings, we shall be able to know the breadth of that law, the efficacy of human rights protection in Kenya.
Yeah.
And then on number 2, yes, first and foremost, I'm a very strong human rights defender. There's no way I can support a law that is going to take us back. And personally, I feel this law is very good, taking into account the kind of attacks that we have been receiving. And if there was no terror in Kenya, there was no reason for us to do the amendments.
All
so
right.
those amendments, they have come because of the so-called problems that we are having.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Bonnie, there were a number of people who wanted to make their submissions about this law. As you wind up, now that the time for submissions has passed and perhaps legal action like LSK is threatening to take would be an option, are you going to be among the people who would take legal action to ensure that these laws aren't enacted?
So I know court is going to court concerning the same. I think what you need to do is actually push the laws. We break the unjust laws and see what's going to happen next. So break the unjust law, let's see what the court decides.
All right, proposing for breaking of unjust law. I wonder how many people will stand with you on that.
I'll break them. I'll go take pictures and share them on social media. I'll keep on commenting on what's going on in the country. I'll name names. I'll tweet. I'll Facebook. I'll do pictures. And I'll do graffiti.
All right. Bonnie, okay, in 2015 it ought to be a very interesting year for you. Makodingo, as you wind up, we've spoken about the human element of that would be the hand that really implements these laws. Where do you think the president as well as parliament and all the agencies need to apply focus for these laws to actually come to life and act in the manner that you envisage them?
I think we need to strengthen the coordination mechanism between the security agencies. They need to set up, the coordinating body fast, very fast. I think we need to appoint an IG quickly, so that then we can fast track the police reforms and probably modernize the police better. We need to do something about our border. Our border with Somalia. At some point, I think I even imagined a wall would probably, help. But there are drones. There is better technology today. So I think we need to work. We need to seriously think about our borders. I think we can beat this. I think we have the law in place. I think there is enough police officers who are dedicated, who want to serve Kenyans, and they are serving Kenyans under very difficult circumstances and conditions. I think we just need to encourage them. Corruption we need to deal with, and I think on corruption there are other people we also need to deal with. The office of the Director of Public Prosecutions. I don't remember him, prosecuting anyone.
All right.
So I mean, we need to do something about that.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that. That's a wish list for 2015 from Makodingo, Washington. Very special thanks for joining us on this last edition of Checkpoint for the year. Irungo Kangata, the same. Thank you very much for joining us, as well as you, Boniface Mwangi. Let's hope to see you in 2015, possibly not behind bars, and abiding by the law, but complaining about the ones that are
breaking
problems.
the unjust laws.
All right. Okay, but in every conversation that we have here on KTN Weekend Prime on Checkpoint, there is a point to this conversation. So what is the point on this conversation that we just had with respect to security, the security laws? And the first one is about the human factor, what Makodingo spoke about, the human factor in policing and insecurity. That needs to be addressed. That an entire recruitment drive for 10,000 police officers wound up in not a single one being appointed or being recruited because of corruption points to a very serious scandal, not just there, but with the kind of police officers that we are looking to attract, as well as the kind of officers who are in there. So that is something that perhaps needs to be dealt with in 2015 and going forward. Secondly, there's something that we did not address on this panel tonight, but for a very specific reason, because it would have distracted from what we wanted to talk about, and that is the manner in which parliamentarians acted on Thursday. Whether or not you are against or for the bill, there are laws and standing orders within parliamentary procedure that guide how people should act. That was shameful by any measure and by any standard, and all of the parliamentarians on both sides who acted in such a manner as to bring down the reputation of Kenya in front of the world need to think about their actions. Finally, laws being made for posterity or for convenience. We need to think about the kind of laws we're implementing and what effect they will have, not just in the short term, but for posterity. Are we legislating things that in law we will not be able to reverse later on in our future? Those are things we need to ponder on when we go forward into the implementation of this and other laws, and that is the point.